Hi guys, it's Miss Sims. I'm going to go ahead and finish up the notes for the Great Depression and the New Deal. So to kind of review really quickly, we talked about the Great Depression before spring break, and we said that that was caused by a lot of different factors. So World War I ends, and Europe is in shambles. Germany gets a lot of the blame for that, and because of that, they are supposed to pay war reparations. They're supposed to pay like a guilt tax for that. Well, they don't have any money to pay it, and so they're not paying France and France and Great Britain. Great Britain and France are not able to pay the United States, so that's causing a problem. Okay. Also, we're going to see Americans are buying a lot of stuff on credit, and eventually that credit is going to run out. The stock market is going to collapse. Banks are going to overextend themselves. They're going to not have a lot of the safety nets that they have today. And so there's a lot of different problems, and it's very complicated, but it's going to kind of result in this perfect storm. We're going to get this major depression really all across the world, okay? And so we talked about during spring break that Herbert Hoover was our president. He became president, and then like a year or 18 months later, the Great Depression really gets into full swing. And he is a Republican, which means he's conservative, which means that he believes that the government, the federal government, should not step in and help. That is really something that should be done at the local and the state level. Because unemployment is so high, and because this is such a widespread depression, that can't really happen. There's not really a lot of ways that it can help. Things just get worse and worse and worse, and we get to where about 25% of the people are unemployed. So we've got some major issues. As a result, Hoover is not going to get reelected. There's a lot of different other things as well. He tried to do some things, but it wasn't able to create enough change. And so people are going to vote in a different direction. They're going to vote for the Democrat, FDR, and he is going to be elected. And so we're going to go through a lot of the stuff with him. Some of the stuff that we talk about on the notes is not going to be, or that we talk about on the video is not going to be on your fill in the blank notes. And that's okay. I'll tell you the things that if it's not on there, you don't have to write it. I just have it for background, to help you guys know a little bit more about the topic. Okay, so Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he is I believe he is a cousin of Teddy Roosevelt, who was president before, during the progressive movement. The Roosevelts are a very well-connected political family. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started. Well, sorry, trying that button. Okay, you won't have to write this. This is just background so you kind of understand what we're talking about. We'll call him FDR because that's what he's called. FDR is going to be born into a very wealthy family. He's an only child. He is cherished, spoiled. He ends up going to Harvard. He's an athlete. So he's very popular, very wealthy, very well connected, just kind of perfect position. He is going to marry Eleanor Roosevelt. This isn't a marriage of great love. Eleanor Roosevelt is a very wealthy woman herself. Her family is very well connected as well. And so this is more a marriage of political power than it is of love. They do have 6 children together, and we'll talk more about Eleanor Roosevelt. She's going to be a very, very influential first lady, and we'll talk more about that later. All right, before FDR is president in 1921, he is going to come down with polio, which there isn't a vaccine at this time, and polio is going to hit quite a lot of people. And for some people, they died from it because it made their lungs so weak that they weren't able to breathe. A lot of people are going to recover, but they're going to be left with other ailments, so their muscles will be weak. FDR, by the time he becomes president, and throughout his presidency, kind of depending on what time it is, he has a hard time walking. In a lot of his speeches, you'll see him standing up against a podium. Well, he will have braces on his leg, and he is holding on to the podium. And what the media would do is they would not start filming until he was set up, and then they would stop filming or taking pictures after he was done. And so a lot of times someone would have to help him get him into a wheelchair or help him get to his seat, and no one ever took pictures of that. It's just a very different time period than like today. Today, if a president does something silly or does something that could be perceived as weak, the news will take pictures of it and they will blast it everywhere. That wasn't how the press reacted during that time period. Okay, so just a very different time. Okay, this is also not on your notes. Don't panic. This is just to kind of let you know. He has a very long, well-established political career. Okay, he is a senator for New York, which is a very powerful position in Congress. Eventually becomes Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Navy, just like Teddy Roosevelt. He was a vice president candidate. The person that he was on the ticket with was not elected, so he never became vice president. He's going to serve as a governor of New York, and then eventually in 32, he defeats Herbert Hoover for president, and he is going to be elected 4 times to president, okay, to be a president. During this time period, there is no law that outlaws someone from being elected more than 2 times to be president. We've never had anyone that has been elected more than 2 times president because it was kind of accepted during this time period that you would only run 2 times. And that was a precedent that was set by George Washington because he only served 2 terms. Okay. After FDR dies, they are going to pass an amendment that makes it to where you can only be elected twice. The reason that he went for more than 2 terms was because we were in the middle of the Great Depression and we were in the middle of World War II. And so most people believed that it was better that we keep the same leadership that was doing a good job rather than starting over new with someone else. Okay, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Okay, this is where your notes are going to start. All right, so the presidency, it's important to understand like what his personality was. So he was very energetic, he was very compassionate, he was very confident, and he has this persona of not fearing hard things, which is important because he's president during the world's the worst economic crisis that the world had ever had up until that point, and another major world conflict, which is going to be World War II. Okay, so that's going to be really important, and he works very hard to portray this image. Okay, and we'll talk about this in a second. So he is going to break tradition in a lot of different ways. So Herbert Hoover, we said, was a Republican. FDR is a Democrat. And so he breaks a lot of that tradition with the conservative party, the Republicans, because he's a different party. Okay, so he creates what's called a brain trust. So he gets advisors outside of his cabinet to help him with issues that he may not be prepared for. So women's issues. He would pull in female leadership from around the country to ask them, what do you guys think? Dealing with issues of race, lynching, how to help the African American community. He would pull in African American leaders and ask them, what do you see as the way forward? He was humble in that way that he knew he didn't know everything, and he would pull in people that had different life experiences than him so he could learn from them. He's going to appoint the first female to his cabinet. So cabinet is like the inner advisors that he has, like Secretary of State, those kinds of things. Okay, so Frances Perkins is going to be the first female cabinet, and that was because of his wife. Eleanor Roosevelt was very, very influential with her husband. Okay, she did not bully him. They were probably as close to a marriage of equals as you will get during this time period, but she would not allow the servants to put FDR to bed at night because he needed help because of his polio. She did it every single night because she wanted to be the last person to talk to him at night about political issues, to make sure that FDR thought things through and her perspective was heard. And so this first female cabinet member, many people believe that that is Eleanor's doing. She, like I said, she's a very influential first lady. She does a lot for women and for African Americans during this time period. Okay, FDR is also not afraid to call an emergency session of Congress if necessary, or a national bank holiday. A national bank holiday is basically, during this time period, there were what were called runs on banks, which people would come in and they would try to withdraw their money. And we talked about before that banks didn't keep exactly how much money that you had. They would loan it out to other people. So if everybody came in at once, they would be in trouble because they wouldn't have enough money. So what FDR would do is he would say, okay, we're going to have a bank holiday. Let's call it a pause and let's inspect, see what's going on at these banks, rather than them just closing and people losing their whole savings. Okay, he's going to be elected 4 times. He does not serve 4 full terms. He dies in his 4th term, and his vice president Truman is going to take over for him. He is going to be president during the Great Depression and during most of World War II. So he is probably one of the most influential presidents that we have, besides Abraham Lincoln, George Washington. He kind of ushered us through these major crises. Okay, he also is going to use media to his fullest. So so there's not like people aren't watching TV. That technology isn't quite there yet. But the radio is really popular. Lots and lots of people had radios. And so he is going to do what are called fireside chats. And those are radio shows where he would talk directly to the people about what's going on. And even if he wasn't able to solve the problem, it helped people feel like he understood what they were going through and he was paying attention. This is very, very different than the president before, Herbert Hoover, who we saw hid behind the curtains whenever veterans from World War I demanded their pensions and help, things like that, and he just kind of hid. So even though FDR is not going to solve all the problems, no one is going to question whether he's doing something, whether he's trying or not. Okay, and so we'll kind of get into that later. Okay. All right, so this is his personal approach towards the Great Depression. He believes that it is the responsibility of the government to help, and directly if needed. So what he means is, if you need money, like, we need to help, and the federal government should send that money directly if needed. So let's pause. It's time out. Think about 2020. You guys may have heard of the stimulus check. So this is based on how much money you make, how many children are in your household. Potentially every household in the United States is supposed to be, except for like the very, very wealthy, are supposed to be getting a stimulus check, which is a check, money, coming to households, like today, 2020. Okay, this idea, this direct relief, it comes from this time period, the Great Depression during the 30s. Okay, so back to the 1930s. Basically, FDR is doing the opposite of what the president before him, Hoover, did, which was the idea that we should maintain a budget, we should cut taxes, we should wait for the recovery to happen. That is not what FDR does. And to be fair, FDR saw that that waiting was not working, so he learned from that. And all of the stuff that FDR does not work. I don't even know that half of it works, but it doesn't really matter. People believe that he's doing something, and that is what is important. Is people need to believe that. That's how you get elected. Okay. Historians are not sure to what extent the New Deal, so that's the name of FDR's plan is called. It's called the New Deal. People are not sure to what degree the New Deal worked and what degree World War II pulled us out of this depression. So there's a lot of different things going on, and people argue about it helped some, it didn't help at all, it helped a lot, doesn't matter, World War II helped, whatever. Okay, moving forward. So all of this New Deal of FDR's is going to be based off of an economist named John Maynard Keynes. So this is Keynesian economics. And it's this idea that the government should increase spending. And if the government increases spending, The government will create jobs. And if the government creates jobs, people will get paid. And if people get paid, people will spend their money. And if people spend their money, that will create jobs. And then people will spend their money. And then eventually the government can step back and this economy will be able to support itself. That is the idea. Even if the government doesn't have the money. So this is called deficit spending. Even if the government does not have the money to start with, the government should borrow the money, print the money, make the money up. Okay? This is a new idea for the 1930s. Okay? It's not brand new. He didn't completely come up with it, but this is a new idea. This is very different than the ideas before, which were called laissez-faire, which basically means the government should not get involved. Okay? This idea, this Keynesian economics, John Maynard Keynes, these ideas are being used today in 2020, dealing with COVID-19 and how that's going to affect the economy. Okay, so I want you guys to kind of pay attention to this stuff and then listen to what's going on in the government and things like that. And you're going to see some things that look kind of similar. Okay, all right. The New Deal has a bunch of different agencies and organizations. There's so many of them that they abbreviated all of them, and they're actually going to call them the alphabet soup. The CCC, the FERA, the WPA, the AAA, the PWA, NRIA, FDIC, SEC, SSA, NLRB, whatever. You're not going to have to memorize all of this. Don't panic. What you are going to need to know is which of the three groups they fall into. Okay, so if I told you the CCC is this and it does this, you need to be able to tell me, is that relief, recovery, or reform? Okay, so all of these programs fall into three different parts of helping the public. Okay, all of this makes up the New Deal. So the first part is called relief. So this is really helping individuals directly. So it is giving money, shelter, food, those kinds of things. So also pause. Some of these organizations can be more than one of these. So don't panic if you're I'm not sure if it's this or if it's that. It might be more than one of them. That's okay. Okay. Usually it's one, but it can be more than one. So the CCC, this is the Civilian Conservation Corps. Basically what it did is it created jobs in cities. For African Americans in cities, the unemployment rate was 80%. Okay, so it's about 25% as a whole for workers, but for African Americans, it's 80%. That's really, really bad. Okay, and most African Americans were already living in greater poverty than other Americans. Okay, so the CCC is going to take people. I think it was men ages 18 to 25, and it takes them from the cities and it ships them out somewhere else into the country to do jobs, like to clean up beaches or to do this or to do that, to do this. And then they get paid and then they send their money back home. And so that was kind of the idea there. Okay, the WPA was a Work Public Association, I think, and it did similar things. Okay, so the TVA is the Tennessee Valley Authority. So that was in Western North Carolina and in Tennessee. That is going to be part relief and that's going to be part recovery. So let's talk about recovery and then I'll talk more about the TVA. So recovery is aimed at helping the economy as a whole. Okay, so the industrial sector, agriculture, creating jobs. So the TVA was a part of the recovery and kind of relief. So it was aimed at helping the Tennessee Valley, which is Western North Carolina and part of Tennessee. So this area of the South was really far behind. People still had dirt floors. Lots of people did not have electricity. People were out of work, but people were already poor in the Appalachian Mountains before that. Okay, so what the TVA is going to aim to do is it's going to give people jobs, but it's also aimed at helping this whole area. So that's why it's partly recovery. And so they would put in dams, which would create electricity for the region. It would give people jobs, but it would also create that. It also, this is what created, my brain just went blank. What is it called? What is it called? Blue Ridge Parkway. So this is like the aqueduct part that you drive on the Blue Ridge Parkway. That's like a bridge on the side of the mountain. That was built during this time period. So they would just go and they would do stuff and they would just build things and it would give people jobs. Okay. And so that was kind of the idea behind that. All right. Third part is reform. So reform is aimed at fixing problems that created the Great Depression so that they won't happen in the future. Okay. So one of those is the FDIC. So the next time you go to a bank, you don't even have to go in it. You can just drive by like the window. There will be like a gold sign on the window that says proud member of the FDIC. So what the FDIC is the federal government insures the money at that bank, and banks have to be a part of that now. So basically what that means is if you have $10,000 in that bank and that bank fails, you don't lose your $10,000. The federal government will like insure that, give that back to you to a certain point. It won't do like a bazillion $1,000,000, but to a certain point. Okay. So that's the FDIC. Social Security is going to be a part of that. So that is where people over 65 or people with disabilities, they can get a check every month to help them with after they retire or if they're disabled. So that's part of it. Okay. So that's kind of the idea of that. Again, what I would expect you to be able to do is I'm going to, I believe it will be Wednesday and Friday. You will be looking at a couple different organizations and you'll be trying to figure out, okay, is this relief? Is it recovery? Is it reform? Is it a mixture? Okay, so you'll be doing that. All right, 1933, so this is shortly after FDR becomes president. They're going to pass the 21st Amendment. They are going to get rid of Prohibition. So if you don't remember, Prohibition was where they outlawed alcohol. Very, very unpopular. If people are poor and they are suffering, they want to drink, okay? So not to mention that was it unpopular, but it also was stupid at this point. So people were drinking anyways, but the government wasn't able to get any taxes out of it. And they were spending a ton of money trying to enforce this, sending out police, all of this stuff. And they're having a terrible time. So what they're going to do is they're going to pass the 21st Amendment and say, all right, if you're 18 or older, yes, it used to be 18. If you're 18 or older, you can drink, but you have to pay a tax on it. Okay. And so that is going to generate money that is going to help the federal government pay for some of all this stuff. Okay. That makes FDR very popular. Yay, they can drink now. Okay. Everyone didn't love FDR. Okay. So it is hard for us to look back at that critically because at the end of FDR, so when FDR dies, and shortly after the war's over, the United States is a victorious ally coming out of World War II. They've defeated the evil Germans. Our economy is booming. We are just killing it on the world stage. And so people see FDR. He was our leader through all of this. So he is very, very popular. That is true. There's lots of people that liked him. He got elected 4 times. That's not nothing. But there were a lot of people that weren't his biggest fan. And so we'll talk about that. So the Republicans. So FDR is a Democrat. The Republicans. They don't love him because he is very, very liberal. He's doing a lot of stuff. They think that the government is too much in control, spending too much money, and that is no different than it would be today. Okay, so today Republicans are usually concerned with spending too much money on the economy, things like that. They want to be more conservative, to let the economy take care of itself to a certain extent, not have a bunch of rules, not spend a bunch of money. That tends to be what Republicans are pushing for back then and today. Democrats tend to spend more money, more social programs. They would say helping people. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that. All right, there are some other people that don't like FDR because they don't think he goes far enough. Okay, Huey Long is one of those guys. So he takes welfare a step further. He is what we would call a true socialist. He would give Bernie Sanders a run for his money today. He was a senator from Louisiana, and he has what's called a Share Our Wealth program, and he believed that every family in the United States should get $2,000, which today would be a little over $36,000, whether they worked or not. He planned to run against FDR during his second term, but he's going to end up being assassinated before that happens. So that's him. All right, we've got another guy, Charles Coughlin. He's called the radio priest. He was a very influential radio personality. So at first he supports FDR, but then he thinks that the New Deal, so FDR's program, is too slow, and so he wants what's called an annual living wage. He also wants the banks to not be controlled by individual companies. He wants it to be controlled by the government. Part of the reason is because he believes that the people that are in control of the banks, which he believes are Jews, some Jews are in control of banks. He believes that it's their fault that the banks failed, and he's going to blame this part of this depression on Jews. This should sound very, very familiar, okay? This is happening all over the world. Adolf Hitler blaming the Jews for the economy being bad, and that is eventually going to lead to the Holocaust. Do not be naive. A lot of people think that, oh, Germany, they've got this issue, they hate Jews, and some of them did. But that was happening in the United States just as much, okay? And this wasn't like random weirdos that were spewing hate. This is like elected officials in the United States that did not like Jewish people, okay? So there's a lot of it's called anti-Semitism, so it's hate of Jewish people all over the world during this time period, okay? All right, and then the third one, this is Dr. Francis Townsend. So he actually is a critic of FDR. FDR says, hey, that's a great idea. He takes it and makes it his own. So he focused on the elderly, so there's a problem. As people get old, they're not able to work, but they still got to eat. And who's going to pay for that? So there's kind of this idea that the government should pay elderly people a certain amount each month. This is going to lead to Social Security, and it eventually does end up happening. Okay? All right, we're getting there. All right, so review from a long time ago. There are 3 branches of government. There is Congress, there is the executive, which is the presidency, and then I got my finger, whichever. The third one is the Supreme Court. Okay, the Congress is controlled by Democrats. FDR is a Democrat, so they can do most of what they want. But the one thing that is stopping them is the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is still very conservative. And they are going to come and they're going to declare a lot of FDR's recovery programs as unconstitutional. FDR doesn't like that. He calls them the 9 old men. He's like, you're all old, stuffy. And he believed that their interpretations of the Constitution was too strict. So what's going to end up happening is called the court packing affair. FDR is going to attempt to put Democratic judges in those positions and try to fill those up. Over time, he's able to do that. FDR loses what we would call the battle, so some of his recovery plans get struck down, but long term, the court becomes more liberal, and so he kind of gets what he wants. Okay, long-term impact. So FDR, like I said, was elected to 4 terms. He serves like 3.5. He ends up dying halfway, or a little less than halfway through his 4th term. But a lot of things become new normal because of him. So what's called deficit spending. So spending money that the government doesn't have. That is a new normal. That happens every single year. Like 2020, 2019, 2018. It happens every single year. That is something that comes out of FDR's presidency. Okay, this idea that the government should regulate the economy, that is still very strong today. That comes out of this time period. Some of those reform programs still exist. Social Security still exists. The FDIC still exists. The SEC still exists. The federal government being an employer, so offering jobs, these federal jobs, and lots of them, that is still a thing, and that is a legacy, or that comes out of FDR's time period. Okay, FDR dies, and they say, all right, we loved FDR, but this could be really bad if we get a president in here that's really power hungry. So they're going to pass the 22nd Amendment, which says you cannot be elected to 2 consecutive terms as president. Now, you can serve more than 2. So, like, say you're vice president and your president dies, you can serve out that term and that doesn't count. But you cannot be elected to more than 2 consecutive terms as president after FDR. And they intentionally waited to pass that until after FDR died. Okay. So there was acknowledgement that that needed to be passed, but they did not want to, because things were so bad with the Great Depression and World War II, they wanted to wait until after those were over because they believed they needed the strong, continuous leadership of FDR. Okay. Also, remember we said FDR is a Democrat. The Democratic Party gets a major boost because of FDR. He was very popular among a lot of people. Okay. Great Depression. It's not just happening in the United States, it's happening across Europe. Germany and Italy are going to deal with it in a similar way. They are going to have strong leaders that take control and become dictators. And they're going to use fascism, which is far extreme right, to take control. We're going to see that through the Nazi Party in Germany, through the fascists using Mussolini in Italy, the Soviet Union, so this is formerly Russia. The Soviet Union is going to do the exact opposite. They're going to go far left. They're going to use communism, but they are also going to use a dictator to seize control. Okay, if you're looking at these pictures, this is Mussolini. He's the leader of Italy during this time period. This is Joseph Stalin. Oops. He is the leader of the Soviet Union during this time period and for a long time after this. And then this is Adolf Hitler, you guys all know, leader of the Nazi Party in Germany. Okay, sets the stage very nicely for World War II, which is what we'll be talking about next week. Okay, all right. Try to close this out. Sorry, my computer's taking forever. Get a couple more minutes just looking at my face. Come on. Come on, computer. There it goes. All right, bye, guys.